I want you to make it better. I want you to make it better. And the question is going to be, what if he never makes it better? You see, I'm here. Praise the Lord. Okay, they're hallelujah. And they can go, aren't you miserable? No, I'm really not. What do you have that I don't have? Don't shut down. Don't give up. Don't become bitter. Surround yourself with people who love Jesus. But I promise you that I think today you'll be really, really encouraged at the very end, because I learned something I never even thought of. Okay, good morning, everybody. We're glad you're here. And for those of you that are watching us online, apps, Roku, YouTube, we are very glad you're joining us today too. If you want to know more about our ministry, go online to womensbiblestudy.com. There you can get handouts, you can get past lessons, you can watch the rest of this series. Anything you want to know about us is on there. So we are in the middle of a summer series, and we're working through the book of Proverbs. And for the last 2 weeks, we've kind of done an overview of what Proverbs is and why wisdom is so incredibly important in our life. Last week, we talked about why we need to build our life on a strong foundation of wisdom. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to answer a couple more questions about Proverbs, and then we are going to talk about wives. And if you're not married, I want you to know it doesn't matter if you're married or not married, because if you aren't married, then you need to know this before you actually get married. So we're going to read a very long story, but I think it will have a really good point to it. So that's kind of the plan for today. So I want us to be able to live out Proverbs when it comes to our marriages, because if we do, then your life and my life will get so much easier. So I really, really do believe that. So let's ask this first question up here. What is actually the purpose of Proverbs? Now, we've talked about what Proverbs is and who wrote it and all that, but what is the purpose? And the purpose we actually find in the very, very first few verses of Proverbs. Proverbs 1, verse 1, it says, "These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise." Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives, to help them do what is right, just, and fair. Now, what we see right off the bat is there is a lot of very brilliant and smart and talented people out there. And they're smart enough to become actually very famous, very rich. The problem is that they're not wise enough to live very, very successful, good lives, and their lives are pretty disastrous. We can see that with a couple people that came to my mind. President Bill Clinton was one. He's smart enough to become president of the United States, but not wise enough when he decides to have an affair or whatever he had with Monica Lewinsky. And so you're smart enough to get this to be president, but then when it comes to living out wise things to do in your life, he just never got that. We see that with Bill O'Reilly, who had this great career, and he was an author, and he had The Factor, and he's just a smart media news guy, and then he is not wise. He's foolish enough to do stupid things and not have with wisdom, with the whole sexual harassment or whatever it was, and his whole world came crumbling down because he was smart, but he was foolish. So right now, we are in 2018, we're videotaping this, and I say that because in 2020, people will watch this and they'll be like, what was the big deal? Well, at this point, we have so many things happening with the world, and companies are firing their top, management, or the media, or the news with Bill O'Reilly. They're getting rid of a lot of people because of this whole sexual immorality that's going on and what they're doing. And so I thought this was kind of funny. We wrote this, there you go. My sister sent this to me at Christmas time. This is probably not the year to hang that mistletoe up around the office, okay? Because that's just kind of where we're at right now. Like, you have to be careful what you say and what you do. And if you're a man, make sure, you don't put your arm around stuff. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. So that's what we're living in 2018. And what it really shows us is there's a lot of foolishness going around from very, very smart, wealthy, people. We see it with Matt Lauer. in the media. We see it in politics with like Al Franken. We see it in film with Kevin Spacey. So we see all these things. And these guys work very, very hard to work up the political chain and the media chain and the film industry, but their lives are decimated because they lived without wisdom. Before his death, one of the richest men in the world said, "I would have given all the money if I could have just made one of my 6 marriages work." Because he doesn't know how. He knows how to be rich and wealthy and all that, but he does not know how to live a life with wisdom. And that's what you and I face every single day of our life. Here's what Proverbs 1:4 says. These proverbs will give insight to the simple. See, that's what we learn. It doesn't really matter how much money you have. You can still be very, very simple-minded. So, apparently people think, this is my first joke, you gotta laugh. This is actually kind of funny. Okay, people think that if you're a blonde, that you're simple-minded. That's just kind of the way it works. So, here you go. There was a blonde and a redhead, and they were watching the 6 o'clock news, and the redhead says to the blonde, "I bet you $50 that lead story that guy actually does jump off the building." The blonde takes it up on the bet. A few minutes later, the newscaster comes on and says, "I'm sorry to say, but the man jumped." So the redhead's feeling kind of bad, like, I shouldn't have bet on things like that. And plus the fact she knew that she watched the 5:30 news and knew he would jump anyway. So she tells the blonde, she said, "You know what, I'm really sorry that I did that." She said, "Because I knew ahead of time that he really would jump." And the blonde said, "Well, that's interesting because I saw the 5:30 news too. I just didn't think he would do it again." I thought that was kind of cute. Okay, there you go. Apparently, that's what Proverbs is for, is the simple-minded like a blonde, okay? But we're really talking 2 things, wives and then this first section, and we'll go into that. But here's our next question. Where does wisdom begin? And we talked about this the first day, that wisdom actually has to pretty much begin with God. And we always say the wisest thing you can do is give your life to Jesus. So we've already made that clear. But where does wisdom really begin? And Proverbs 9:10 says this, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." See, I don't think you and I will ever live wise lives if we don't understand what that fear of the Lord means. Lee Eclov says this. He says, "I used to think that the fear of the Lord was like driving down the road, watching a policeman in my rearview mirror." He said, but actually a better picture of the fear of the Lord, because whenever you have a policeman in the back, you're terrified. It's this terrified feeling that he's going to pull you over and give you a ticket. He said, but actually the better view for him when it comes to the fear of the Lord is like a teenager who's driving and suddenly spots her father behind her, okay? And he says, it's kind of like seeing him back there puts her on notice. He's not out there to hurt her. He's not out there to give her a ticket. He's just putting her on notice that, look, I care about you, and I'm going to follow you just to make sure that you put your hand on the wheel the right way and you turn your blinker on, because I care about what happens to you after this particular 30-minute drive. I care about what happens to you over the rest of your life, and I want you to stay safe. It's kind of like God is that way. He's watching over us. He's trying to help us develop really, really good, healthy habits, to make wise choices, not to hurt us, but to help us. It's kind of like we glance in our rearview mirror and we see God in his brilliance and his holiness, but we also realize that we want to respect that and revere that and trust that and love that. So it's not a bad kind of a fear. It's a good kind of a fear. R.C. Sproul says this. He says, we need to make some important distinctions about the biblical meaning of fearing God. These distinctions can be helpful, but they also can be a little dangerous. When Luther struggled with that, he made this distinction, which has since become somewhat famous. He distinguished between what is called a servile fear and a filial fear. The servile fear is a kind of fear like a prisoner in a torture chamber has for his tormentor, the jailer or the executioner. It's that kind of dreadful anxiety in which someone is frightened by the clear and present danger that is represented by another person. It's the kind of fear that a slave would have at the hands of a malicious master who would come with a whip and torment the slaves. Servile refers to a posture of servitude toward a malevolent owner. Okay, so that is what we are not thinking that God is. He's not that way. That's not the kind of fear he wants us to have. We saw this. For those of you that do our Wednesday study with us, a couple years ago, and I don't know if you remember this, Pastor Saeed Abedini was in the Iranian prison. He was the pastor in prison there for 3.5 years. When he got out, we were able to get a hold of him, and within 4 months of him getting out of prison after 3.5 years in Iran, he came to our Bible study, and I was able to interview him for a couple hours. It was really fun. We brought him down here, and his mom and dad were with him, so we took him up to our cabin up north because he just he needed a break in life. So we took him up there, and so we were in the cabin. My son was with us, and he had gone somewhere, and he came flying in the house. Like, he opened the door so fast, and Saeed was standing there in the family room, and this look of sheer terror just went over his face. And afterwards, I'm like, what just happened? And he was like, I can't, whenever people do that, like, he goes, it terrifies me. Because I know I've lived this to where every time someone flew open the door, they were going to grab me, put me in solitary, beat me, do whatever. And so it terrified him. And see, that is not the kind of fear. I don't want anyone to ever walk out of here and be fearful of God like that. Like, I'm so afraid he's going to hit me. I'm so afraid he's going to do something bad. I'm so afraid. That's just not the God that we serve. It's kind of like fear of lions. Beryl Markham wrote a book in her autobiography, West with the Night. She tells of a time when she was a little girl, this is in the 1900s, where she came face to face with a lion. She was running playfully through the fields around her farm, and suddenly she became within 20 yards of a lion laying in the grass. She said the lion was sprawled out there in the morning. It was huge, it was big, it was red, it was just this gorgeous animal. She said he stood there, idle, and she didn't know what to do. She stopped. She knew if she ran, they always told her, if you come across a lion, do not run. And so she knew that she shouldn't run, so she didn't, but she backed up and she walked away really softly and slowly began to sing a song. She started then to kind of pick up her pace a little bit, thinking she could get into some thick bushes that would give her protection. And she writes this. She says, the country was gray-green and dry, and the sun lay on it closely, making the ground hot under my bare feet. There was no sound, no wind. Even the lion made no sound, coming swiftly behind me. What I remember most clearly of the moment that followed, a scream that was barely a whisper, a blow that struck me to the ground, and as I buried my face in my arms, I felt the lion's teeth close on my flesh. I remained conscious, but I closed my eyes, tried not to be. It was not so much the pain as it was the sound. The sound of the lion's roar in my ears will only be duplicated when the gates of hell slip their wobbly hinges one day. It was an immense roar that encompassed the world and dissolved me in it. I shut my eyes very tight and lay still under the weight of the lion's paws. Some of you have that view of God, and you just literally think he's out to pounce on you. And a lot of it could be how you were raised. If you had a father that was angry all the time or very mean and all the time he sent you to your room and he punished you and hit you or whatever, you think that way about God. And I want you to know that is absolutely not the God that we believe and trust in. C.S. Lewis gives us a better visual of a lion in his Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe. He calls Aslan. Aslan is who is like Jesus in the movie. There's a scene between Susan and the beavers, and one of them says, Aslan is a lion. I think we have a thing there. Go, Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Ooh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. See, when you and I get a really good view of who God is, that he's king, I think it changes how we're going to want to act. We're going to want to listen to someone who's the king, because the king knows what's best. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but I'm kind of addicted to that movie now, The Greatest Showman. I can sing you every song if you'd like, but I won't. In there's this scene where the whole P.T. Barnum's group goes to England and they're in front of the Queen. And it's really amazing because they're so respectful of her. And there's this one scene where one of the guys on P.T. Barnum's team pops off and says something that could be disrespectful to the queen. And she stares at him, and everyone's just on pins and needles. And then she starts laughing at what she says, and she's okay with it. But watching these people made me think they had so much respect for her because they didn't want to do anything against her, because they just really had that much feeling towards her. And that is what I think God wants from us. He wants us to have so much respect and love, knowing that he loves us and he wants the best for us. I was thinking about electricity. My cousin is an electrician. And he has a very, very healthy respect for electricity, because he really knows ultimately that electricity could kill him if he didn't know what to do, but he never shies away from it. He doesn't know, but what he does know is he's very knowledgeable about how electricity works and what wires he can put with wires. So he's very, very careful with what he does, because he knows ultimately there could be pain on the other end if he doesn't do it properly. My son worked on a job site with him. I'm surprised he's still alive today, because my cousin was sitting down wiring this whole thing together, and Sean, he's kind of a jokester, he thinks everything's funny. And so he went up behind him, unbeknownst to him, poked him in the sides and went zzz, just like that. My cousin, I thought, was going to kill him. Like, he was so upset. He was like, "How you don't do that to an electrician." But as long as you know what you're doing as an electrician, you're going to be fine. And it's the same with us. As long as we can read and see what God's wisdom looks like and we do it, we're going to be fine. I had a really hard time trying to get a definition of what the fear of the Lord meant. And this is what I found. Here's on our little blue screen. Without the fear of the Lord, we will make final decisions based on our faulty human understanding. In other words, you're going to be like, "Oh, I want to divorce my husband because of this. Oh, I want to go out and get drunk because of this. Oh, I want to gossip with my friends because of this." Like, we make decisions based on our faulty human understanding. But when we incorporate the fear of the Lord into every moment of our lives, we make decisions based on his approval. And I thought that was great. Suddenly it's like, you go, "Well, I'm going to leave my husband." And you're like, "Well, wait a minute. What does God say about that? I'm going to gossip about my friend. Wait a minute, before I make that decision, what does God have to say about that? Before I go out and get drunk, what does God," like, you see what I'm saying? Now how we live our life is based on what God has to say and not just our faulty view of understanding. We live with the knowledge that the creator of the universe is intimately involved in our every move. He knows, or he sees, he knows, and evaluates all of our choices. In other words, we're going to answer to him. Especially if you and I are followers of Jesus, it's like we're going to answer to him. He's giving us all of this great, and we have to do what he asks us to do. Our problem in this world that we live in is we don't really want to listen that much. 300 years before Christ, the Greek philosopher Zeno made a statement that, of course, he didn't know would be so popular to us today, but he said this, that the reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, of course, is so we can listen more and talk less. Now, he's made that statement, and parents use it to this day, like thousands of years later. But at the time back then, think about it, there wasn't really noise. There were no cars and airplanes and trains, and it was very peaceful, and people talked, but there wasn't like computers and movies, and there wasn't all of this stuff that was going on. And yet you and I today are so bombarded with noise constantly that it's so hard to listen to what God is trying to get through to us. I realize that when I turn my radio off in my car, it's amazing when I do that, how God can speak to me. I'm totally going, "Okay, God, here's the deal. It's quiet in here. I'm turning the radio off. I just want to hear your voice." And suddenly he'll give me an illustration that I need to use, or he'll give me something that I should do in Bible study that I never would have heard if I would have just, if I had kept all the noise on. This made me laugh. A couple was strolling along an ocean beach and noticed a bottle floating in the water, and they weighed it out, and it contained a note. They opened it, and here was what it read. "I'm marooned on a tropical island. There's no pollution, there's no traffic, there's no noise, there's no politicians, there's no taxes. Do not come and find me." And I thought that was great, because I thought, there you go. But we have so much noise that sometimes we don't want to hear what God has to say. And yet, what we see from Proverbs is that wisdom and God, they're shouting to us, please make good decisions, please make good decisions. And so we're going to take that thought and move it into, what does God say about wives? What does he say the best thing? What is wisdom when it comes to wives? I want us today to look within ourselves, because I had to do this when I went through this whole thing and say, what kind of a wife am I to my husband? Proverbs 21:19 says this: "It is better to live in a desert than with a quarrelsome and nagging wife." Solomon said, it is better for a husband to go out in the desert and live by himself, and men do not do good by themselves. It's better for them to do that than to come home to a wife that is constantly quarreling and nagging with everything that he says and does. A teenager once wrote to Ann Landers, and she said this: "I'm 15 years old, and my biggest problem is my mother. All she does is nag, nag, nag. From morning till night, it's turn off the TV, do your homework, wash behind your neck, stand up straight, go clean your room. How can I get her off my case?" Ann Landers writes back and says, here's an idea. Turn off the TV, do your homework, wash behind your neck, stand up straight, and go clean your room. Now, that's awesome, because that's a 15-year-old child. You can tell your child that. It does not work for your husbands. It just doesn't. It's not going to work if you're going to act like that to your husbands. Some women, honestly, are never, ever happy with anything that goes on in their life. And they do nothing but complain to their husbands. Their husbands go off, work all day, work really difficult. And we have a whole nother section we can talk about husbands. We're just talking about wives at this point. So most of you, I'm assuming if you're here, your husband has a job and he's off working and you're with the kids or whatever. He works all day, and then he has to come home after dealing with all the stuff he has to deal with in the daytime. And now he's got to come home to wives and children and the chaos that brings. And the question is, what do you do? Because if you're quarrelsome and nagging, and the minute he walks through the door, you have to tell him what to do now and stop that and do this and take the kids. The Bible says it's better for your husband to just go live in a desert by himself. Proverbs 27:15 says this: "A continual dripping on a rainy day and a contentious wife are alike. Trying to keep her in check is like stopping a windstorm or grabbing oil with your right hand." Imagine how he must feel to come home to constant dripping like a raindrop. Drip, 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 drip. I just want to throw this out. If you want to complain to somebody about your day and life, first take it to Jesus. That's probably the best place to go. Let God change your husband's heart. Let him prepare before you just bombard him with everything. Rob comes home from work. He sits down, has a cigar, glass of wine, and we sit down and we download. We sit down and just talk about the day. That's just what we do. And if the kids are around, we say, this is mommy and daddy time for 30 minutes. And I will tell you, it's the best thing for our marriage, because otherwise when men come home, they're just like bombarded with everything. And I get it. Some of you have young kids, and we did the whole soccer and dance, and I understand it. So I'm not minimizing that whatsoever. But you and your husband need to have time by yourself without the kids. And you need to pour your life into just spending time with him without them, instead of the minute he gets in the door, just start complaining about everything that happened during the day. I would be the worst marriage counselor in the world. I think I've told you this before. People would come and say, what do I do about this? And my question would be, have you opened the Bible? Have you read Proverbs? Have you read Ephesians? Have you read where it talks about wives? And they would be like, if they say no, I would say, well, then go read it. And if they say yes, I'd say, well, do you do it? Do you live it? Because we can read all the stuff all we want, but if we're not doing it, nothing's going to change in our marriage. Problem is, nobody is paying attention to the Bible. They don't really want to know. If they knew that God had this great vision for marriage, that men are supposed to love their wives like Christ loved the church, which means he gave everything for them. Like if your husband could just grasp that and just be like, you know what, I need to care about my wife more than the children or my job or anything that goes around there. And women, we're supposed to love our husband. He didn't even say that, respect our husbands. Like give them the respect and the honor that's due to them. The problem is we see women that just sit around and gossip about their husbands to their friends. And the more you gossip and you say negative things about your husband, the more by the time he gets home, you're even madder at him than you ever have been. I want you to know, if your marriage would work if you both could just get on the same page and do what the Bible says and respect your husband. Our problem is we're hearing how to be married from people like housewives of, who is it now? Housewives of Beverly Hills, housewives of I don't know, my kids watch it, I don't know why, but that's where people are getting their idea about marriage from. A husband was told by a marriage counselor one time, you need to go home and be nice to your wife. So one day he comes home and he's dressed in a suit and he has cologne on and a bouquet of flowers and a box of candy. He's trying to make a good impression to show his wife that he loves her, and he's trying to make her happy. The minute he walks into the door, the wife starts in on him. I can't believe that you're acting like this to me. Little Johnny's been throwing up all day long. The dishwasher just broke. Your parents are coming this weekend. And to top it off, you come home drunk. Now, he wasn't drunk. He was trying to be nice. But the point is that some women, no matter what their husbands do, they're never happy. And they can always find something to be angry and frustrated about. And it's just disastrous. Proverbs 24:25 says this, it is better not only to live in the desert, it's better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a quarrelsome wife. Proverbs 12:4 says this, a wife with strength of character is the crown of her husband, but the wife who disgraces him is like bone cancer. Isn't that so graphic? And you have to go home tonight and say, am I a crown to my husband? Does he like to come home to me? Does he want to come home to me? Or does he come home and I just feel like bone cancer to him? It's a really big visual that we kind of got to get a grip on. Here's Proverbs 14:1. A wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down with her own hands. We're going to read for probably the next 10 or so minutes a story. The person who wrote this is called Miss Fran Jan San. I could not get a hold of her. I didn't know how to get a hold of her to even ask permission for this story. So it says, authored by Reddit user Miss Fran Jan San. That's the best I can do. But we're going to read this story together, and then we'll talk about it at the end. Here's what she says. My aha moment happened because of a package of hamburger meat. I asked my husband to stop by the store to pick up a few things for dinner, and when he got home, he plopped the bag on the counter. I started pulling things out of the bag and realized he'd gotten the 70-30 hamburger meat, which means 70% lean and 30% fat. I asked, what's this? He said, hamburger meat, slightly confused. You didn't get the right kind, I said. I didn't, he replied with his brow furrowed. Was there some brand you wanted or something? No. You're missing the point, I said. You got the 70-30. I always get at least 80-20. He laughed and said, oh, that's all? I thought I'd really messed up or something. She said, that's how it started. I launched into him. I berated him for not being smarter. Why would he not get the more healthy option? Did he even read the labels? Why can't I trust him? Do I need to spell every little thing out for him in minute detail so he gets it right? Also, the thing I was probably most offended by, why wasn't he more observant? How could he not have noticed over the years what I always get? Does he not pay attention to anything I do? As he sat there bearing the brunt of my righteous indignation and muttering responses like, never noticed, really didn't think it was that big of a deal, and you know what, I'll get it right next time. I saw his face gradually take an expression that I'd seen on him a lot in recent years. It was a combination of resignation and demoralization. He looked eerily like our son when he gets chastised, and that's when it hit me. Why am I doing this? I am not his mom. Can I just stop and say something really quick? We're not our husband's moms. And when we get that and realize that we're partners and we're trying to do life together and we're trying to work together on things, we're not their bosses. They go to work and most of them have bosses, and it's really difficult to come home and then have to have a boss as a wife. We are not their mothers. She said, I suddenly felt terrible and embarrassed for myself. He was right. It really wasn't anything to get bent out of shape over, and there I was doing just that over a silly package of hamburger meat that he dutifully picked up from the grocery store just like I asked. If I had a specific requirement, I should have been clearer. I didn't know how to gracefully extract myself from the conversation without coming across like I have some kind of split personality, so I just mumbled something like, yeah, guess we'll just make do with it. I'm going to start dinner. He need to go into the desert as far as I'm concerned, or live in the corner of a roof. He seemed relieved it was over, and he left the kitchen, and there I sat alone. And then I sat there and thought long and hard about what I'd just done and what I'd been doing to him for years, probably. The hamburger meat moment, as I've come to call it, certainly wasn't the first time I scolded him for not doing something the way I thought it should be done. He was always putting something away in the wrong place or leaving something out or neglecting to do something altogether, and I was always right there to point it out to him. Why do I do that? How does it benefit me to constantly belittle my husband, the man that I've taken as my partner in life, the father of my children, the guy I want to have by my side as I grow old? 2 cases in point. Number 1, I recently found a shard of glass on the kitchen floor. I asked him what happened, and he said he broke a glass the night before. When I asked why he didn't tell me, he said, well, I just cleaned it up and threw it away because I didn't want you to have a conniption fit over it. Number 2, I was taking out the trash and found a pair of blue tube socks in the bin. I asked him what happened and why he'd thrown them away, and he said, well, they accidentally got in the wash with my jeans. Every time I put in laundry, you feel the need to remind me not to mix colors and whites. I didn't want you to see then and reinforce your obvious belief that I don't know how to wash clothes after 35 years. So it got to the point where he felt it was a better idea, or just plain easier, to cover things up than admit he made a human error. What kind of environment have I created where he feels he's not allowed to make mistakes? And I think that's a great point for all of us to ask ourselves. What kind of environment are you and I creating around our households? To our husbands, are we giving them the freedom to make mistakes, or are we constantly doing what this woman did to him? Where are we? And let's look at these offenses. A broken glass, a pair of blue tube socks, both common mistakes that anyone could have made. But he was right. Regarding the glass, I not only pointed out his clumsiness for breaking it, but also, due to the shard I found, his sad attempt at cleaning it up. As for the socks, even though he clearly stated it was an accident, I gave him a verbal lesson about making sure he pays more attention when he's sorting clothes. Note to self, if your husband does the laundry, you have nothing to ever complain about, okay? I don't care if all the socks come out blue. If your husband does laundry, you are very fortunate. Whenever any issues like this arise, he'll sit and take it for a little bit, but he always responds in the end with something like, I guess it just doesn't matter that much to me. What this constant nagging and harping does is send a message to our husband that says, we don't respect you. We don't think you're smart enough to do things right. We expect you to mess up. And when you do, you'll be called out on it swiftly and without reservation. Given this kind of negative reinforcement over time, he feels like nothing he can do is right in your eyes. If he's confident with himself and who he is, he'll come to resent you. If he's at all unsure about himself, he'll start to believe you. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Neither one is a desirable, beneficial outcome to you, him, or the marriage. As I sat and thought about it, I realized my husband didn't display the same behavior towards me. I even thought about some of the times I really did make mistakes. The time I backed into the gate and scratched the car. He never said a word about it. The time I was making dinner and got distracted by a call from my mom and burned it to cinders. He said, we can just order pizza. The time I tried to put the new patio furniture together and left his good tools out in the rain. Accidents happen, was his only response. I shuddered to think what I would have said had the shoe been on the other foot and he'd made those mistakes. The bottom line in all this is that I chose this man as my partner. He's not my servant. He's not my employee. He's not my child. I didn't think he was stupid when I married him. Otherwise, I wouldn't have. He doesn't need to be reprimanded by me because I don't like the way he does some things. When I got to that point mentally, it then made me start thinking about all the good things about him. He's intelligent. He's a good person. He's devoted. He's awesome with the kids. And he does always helping around the house. Not to always my liking. But even more, not only does he refrain from giving me grief when I make mistakes or do things differently than him, he's always very agreeable to my way of doing things. And for the most part, if he notices I prefer to do something a certain way, he tries to remember it in the future. Instead of focusing on those wonderful things, I just harped on the negative. If we keep attempting to make our husbands feel small or foolish or inept because they occasionally mess up, And I use that term to also mean do things differently than us. I thought that was great. Then eventually they're going to stop trying to do things. Or worse yet, they'll actually come to believe those labels are true. In my case, it's my husband of 12 plus years I'm talking about. The same man who thanklessly changed my car tire in the rain. The guy who taught our kids to ride bikes. The person who stayed with me at the hospital all night when my mom was sick. The man who has always worked hard to make a decent living and support his family. He knows how to change the oil in the car. He can reinstall my computer's operating system. He lifts things for me that are too heavy and opens stuck jar lids. He shovels the sidewalk. He can put up a ceiling fan. He fixes the toilet when it won't stop running. I can't or don't do any of those things, and yet I give him grief about a dish out of place. He's a good man who does a lot for me and doesn't deserve to be harassed over little things that really don't matter in the grand scheme of things. Since my revelation, I try to catch myself when I start to nag. I'm not always 100% consistent, but I know I've gotten a lot better. And I've seen that one little change makes a big improvement in our relationship. Things seem more relaxed. We seem to be getting along better. I think we're both starting to see each other more as trusted partners, not adversarial opponents at odds with each other in our day-to-day existence. I've even come to accept that sometimes his way of doing things may be better. It takes two to make a partnership. No one's always right, no one's always wrong, and you're not always going to see eye to eye on every little thing. It doesn't make you smarter or superior or more right to point out every little thing he does that's not to your liking. Ladies, remember, it's just hamburger meat. And when I read that story, I'm like, I have to read that here. I know it's long and I know whatever, but the point to that is she made so many great points. Why do we take life so seriously? Why do we care if they don't put the glass away or they don't pick up their clothes? Why is that such a big deal? And what happens is it's destroying our marriages because we end up nagging and complaining and whining and you're not happy and it makes him not happy. Proverbs 25, we'll go back to these 3 verses. It's better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a house shared with someone like Miss Fran Jansan. Proverbs 12:4, a wife with strength of character is the crown of her husband, but the wife who disagrees or disgraces him is like bone cancer. And Proverbs 14:1, a wise woman builds her home, but a foolish woman tears it down with her hands. Miss Fran Jan, whatever her name is, was tearing down her house out of foolishness because she was so selfish that everything was about her. And if you want a good marriage, you need to not make it about you. It can't always be about you. It's about it doesn't matter if your husband does something stupid like that. It's just not that big of a deal. Stop taking life so serious. That's my big point to all of Proverbs. When wisdom calls, it's readily available to us. We see it in all these verses, but we need to respond. And if we don't respond in the right way, it will destroy our marriage. We want to be the crown of our husbands, not like a bone of cancer to them. Proverbs 31 is the one chapter that's all about, pretty much most of it's about wives. So I'm going to read some of these verses so you can kind of look and I want you to look inside yourself because like I said, teaching this, I have to look inside myself all the time and say, that doesn't sound very good. Proverbs 31:10 says this, an excellent wife, who can find her? For her worth is far beyond above jewels. The heart of her husband trusts in her. And this is a really good question for you. Does your husband trust in you? When he goes off to work, does he know you're not flirting with the guy next door? Does he know that you're not gossiping about him with your friends? Does he know that you're not tearing him down to the people that you know? Does his heart trust in you? Because that's what Proverbs says he needs to be doing. And if not, you better start changing some stuff around. Her husband, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. I'm going to tell you something that I learned this week. Rob and I have been married for 38 years. So you'd think that I would know how to handle him and what to do and when situations come up. He's been very, very upset over something that's been going on the last month. To the point where he comes home and it's just so, he just is just bogged down by this whole thing that's frustrating him. And so when he comes home, I assume when he tells me everything he wants to tell me about the situation, that he wants my advice. And so he comes home and he's like, this is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. And so me, on the other hand, I'm like, oh, well, I think you should do this, or that person probably meant this. And so I'm giving him all this advice. It does no good. This goes on day after day after day. Finally, we're driving along, and he starts telling me about the situation again. And so I start giving him my advice. And he looked at me and he said this: I want you to know that your advice is not helping me. He said, I need you to not say anything. I'm not telling you this because I want your advice. I'm telling you this because I have to get it out. I have to vent. Like, I have to just throw up all over everything. That's just how I have to do it. And he said, it's not that I don't want to hear your advice. I just don't need it right now. And I was shocked. I was like, oh, I thought when you talked to me, you were just asking for my advice. And it was something I really learned. Just because your husband talks doesn't mean he wants us to talk back. And that was really great. And so what I did was, as he was talking, and he was all I did was pray. And I said, God, here's the deal. He doesn't want my advice. Apparently it's not that great. So you change him. You do what you need to. You make it better for him in his life, because I seriously can't. I'm going to listen, and I'm going to shut up, and you do what you need to do. He gets home. He goes outside. He has a cigar, has his glass of wine, and he comes in and he said, God just made it all better for me. And I was like, well, I thought that was my job. And nope, it's God's job. And when we can realize that about our husbands, and when he comes home, so now this is what I do. He starts talking, and I say, well, do you want to vent, or do you want advice? And there's a difference. And he'll be like, well, let me vent first, and then you can give me advice. Or nope, I don't want your advice, I just want to vent. And 38 years of marriage, and I just learned this last week. So it's something to think about when you're talking to your husbands. Sometimes they don't really want our advice. They just need to just pour out what's going on in their life. And I think you'll see a big change in your marriage. Verse 13, she looks for wool and flax and works with her hands and in delight. In other words, she's not lazy. Does your husband call you in the middle of the day and you're sleeping, or you're watching soap operas, or you're, what is the deal? This woman that she's saying that the wife is she's working with her hands, she's doing things, she's involved in their life and their home. She's like a merchant ship. She brings food from afar. She rises also while it's still night and gives food to her household and portions to her maid. Now, we don't have, I'm sure you don't have maids, and none of us do, but it's this whole idea that she cares so much about her family, but she also cares about the people that work around her or that help her with things. If you have someone that cleans your house for you, you need to love them and hug them and tell them thank you. If your husband comes home and cooks for you, you need to love him and thank him. I'm saying she cares about other things and other people besides herself. She considers a field and buys it. From her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She's always thinking, forward thinking. What can I do? And for some of you, that just means clipping coupons and trying to get to the right store and doing things that helps the household. She girds herself with strength and makes her arms strong. That says to me she probably goes to the gym. I don't do that, okay? I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to make my arms strong, so I scratched that out of my Bible. Verse 18. She senses that her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out at night. She stretches out her hands to the distaff, and her hands grasp the spindle. She extends her hand to the poor. She stretches out her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She makes coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. Everyone knows him. And if he knows him, they know her. And it is so important how they feel about her when they look at him. And you and I are involved in your husband could have a work party. And how people view your husband is how, if you're there and you're drunk and you're acting like a whatever, and you got the low cut thing down here, and everyone's looking at your husband because you're a reflection. And we want to be good reflections to our husband. Strength and dignity. Let's see, where are we at? None of this was even in the notes, but here we go. She makes linen garments and sells them, supplies belts to the tradesmen. Strength and dignity are her clothing. She smiles at the future. Women don't do that. I hate it. The kids are still too young, and then they're going to go to school, and then my life is miserable, and then I have to do this, and now I got to do homework. like no one's smiling at the future. God has given you this life, and we need to look forward to, like, people go like, oh, I'm going to be empty nesters. That's a great time. I promise you, it's a great time. Look forward to things in life. Don't be fearful of the future. She opens her mouth in wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. Do you speak wisdom? Are you speaking kindness? She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. She's not lazy. Her children rise up and bless her, her husband also, and he praises her, saying, many daughters have done nobly, but you excel them all. Charm is deceitful and beauty is in vain, but a woman who fears the Lord shall be praised. And the question that we need to ask ourselves, is that us? Does this woman remotely look like us? And if not, you need to read this over and over and over. And every time you feel convicted, say, God, help me to do that. Help me not to say this. Help me to be better at this. Wives are incredibly important. I was reading this, and we'll put it up. This just made me laugh because this is why women are so important when it comes. There's a man who, his wife got very, very sick. So she's laying in bed, and now he has to take care of everything around the house. This is his notes. Here's the first one. On Monday morning, dearest, I love how in each day that what he calls her changes. Dearest, sleep late. Everything's under control. Lunch is packed. Kids off to school. Menu for dinner's planned. Your lunch is on a tray in refrigerator, fruit cup, finger sandwiches, thermos of hot tea by bedside. See you around 6. Tuesday, it went from dearest to honey. Honey, sorry about the egg rack in the refrigerator. Hope you got back to sleep. Did the kids tell you about the Coke I put in their thermoses? The school might call you on this. Dinner may be a little late. I'm doing your door-to-door canvas for liver research. Your lunch is in the refrigerator. Hope you like leftover chili. Wednesday, it went from dearest to honey to now it's dear Doris. What in the name of all that is sane would you put soap powder in the flour canister? If you have time, could you please come up with a likely spot for Chris's missing shoe? We've checked the clothes hamper, the garage, the back seat of the car, and wood box. Do you know the school has rules about bedroom slippers? There's some cold pizza and a napkin in the oven drawer. We'll be late tonight driving 8 Girl Scouts to tour meatpacking house. Thursday. It's not even dear Doris anymore. It's just Doris. Don't panic. Over the water in the hallway, it crested last night at 9 p.m. We'll finish laundry tonight. Please pencil in answers to the following. How do you turn on the garbage disposal? I thought it was automatic, but I guess not. 2, how do you turn off the milkman? 3, why would that rotten kid leave his shoes in his boots that we've been trying to find for the last few days? 4, what do you do with leftovers when they begin to snap at you when you open the refrigerator door? I don't know what you're having for lunch. Just surprise me. Friday. Hey, he doesn't even put her name down there. Hey, don't drink from pitcher by the sink. I'm trying to restore a pink dress shirt to its original white. Take heart. Tonight the ironing will be folded, house cleaned, and dinner on time. I called your mother. Okay, I love that because that women, we have this great job to do. And we can either do it really graciously and be great wives and loving to our families and our husbands, or we can be a dripping faucet. Here's what happens. God gives us his wisdom, and he shows us in Proverbs 31 what we need to do. But you and I have a choice. And here is what Proverbs says. I think it's chapter 1. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 24. Did I put that on that screen or not? Did I put it in your handouts? Okay. Here's what, there you go, Proverbs 1:24. Here's what wisdom says. Because I called you and you refused. In other words, you now know what Proverbs 31 says. You now know what it means to be a good wife. Now the choice is going to be yours. Are you going to listen and do it, or are you not? If you refuse, this is what wisdom says. Because I called you and you refused, I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention, and you neglected all my counsel and did not want my reproof. In other words, you're sitting here and you're going, I don't want to listen to that. This is stupid. I'm not going to change. I will laugh at you at your calamity. In other words, wisdom will laugh at you when your husband one day walks in the door and says, I'm out of here. You're a witch. I'm sick of it. I found some hot girl at work that I like better. Like, wisdom's going to laugh at you because he said, I've told you what to do, how to make this work, and you're not doing it. So wisdom says, I'm going to laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your dread comes. When your dread comes like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, and then they will call on me. At that point, you're going to be like, oh God, I'm so sorry. But at this point, it's too late, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me. Because here's why. They hated knowledge, and here's our word from the beginning, and did not choose the fear of the Lord. Isn't that amazing? See, if we lived our life the way that God's calling us to do, then that fear of the Lord plays right into that. That we have so much respect for God and what he wants us to do that we just want to do that. Verse 30 says, they would not accept my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. So they shall eat the fruit of their own way and be satiated with their own devices. For the waywardness of the naive will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But he who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. If you do things the way God calls you to do it, there's not this dread of, is my husband going to leave me? What's going to happen to our marriage? There's none of that. You live in this peaceful way that God has given you. And there you have what we always say with Proverbs. It's a choice. God says, here is what wisdom looks like, and here is what foolishness looks like. So the question is, what are you going to do about it? Father, I pray that as we look at these verses and we see what you look for us with when it comes to wisdom and being wives and being, I pray, God, that you'll help us to look within ourselves and say, do I treat my husband like that? Am I a dripping faucet? Is it better for my husband to go live on the rooftop in a corner? God, if that is me, would you change me desperately? God, help us to be wives filled with wisdom and love and concern for our family, but more than a healthy fear of you, because we respect you so much and knowing you want the best for us. Help us to live that out. Pray for that for each person here, every person that's listening to this. I pray, God, that you will change lives and marriages and change us. In Jesus' name, amen. You have to be reading your Bible. I can't tell you. I always say this. I don't know how it changes us. It just does. The sickness, the tragedy, the death, the hit on drugs, the whatever. God wants to use, well, where did God come from? And if he created us, who created him? And how? Is that we tend to look at every battle and every problem in this natural realm. Like what I see, but see, we don't get it here. Because we think Jesus asking him in our life just means, I get to go to heaven.